Down the hill, if you guys have been around this property at all, there's a big, large building right here. It's called the Longhouse, I think. I don't know if you've seen it. It's just... I want to roll the tape back 47 years ago. And that building can accommodate about 2,000 people, if you've seen the size of it. And over a Thanksgiving holiday that was filled, the Thanksgiving of 1968, with 2,000 college students. It was a huge gathering that the Navigators had of all their collegiate ministries, students throughout the country. And there were 2 busloads of college students that came from where I was growing up in Blacksburg, Virginia, where Virginia Tech is. And I was 17. And my folks happened to know the Navigator staff folks, so I hopped the bus, and first time I'd ever been west of the Mississippi. And I landed in that building. And I'd come to know Jesus several years before that. And in a high school of about 1,200, I only knew of 1 or 2 other people that were followers of Jesus. And struggling hugely on what it meant to love and obey Christ. Didn't know how. Church situation that was pretty ill. No youth group. And I landed in this thing with 2,000 college students that were ignited and on fire and loving Jesus. And it was totally overwhelming. Totally overwhelming. The second night of this conference, they had a speaker, and the theme of what he was doing was Isaiah 6. Okay? And I really was struggling with the fact that if I wholeheartedly said those words to God, "Here, my Lord, send me," I'd end up in some grass hut in Africa wasting away my life. Seriously, I was scared to death I'd be a missionary. I was scared to death of being a missionary. And at the end of that particular evening, and this was a guy who had, Steve knows him, he grew up in Japan with him. The guy had been shot through the throat during World War II. He could barely speak, and yet went back to Japan as a missionary to the Japanese. And he said, "Look, don't you go to bed tonight, any of you in this building, unless you can take this passage and pray it back to God. Here, my Lord, send me." I was scared to death of praying that. End of the evening, I sought out one of the students, college students, on the bus driving out here. And I said, it was a Chinese student actually. And I said, "John, I don't know how to do this, but I want to do this." Now this was November, and it was frigid out there. I mean, it was 5 below up here. And we walked out, walked over to the chapel, little chapel over here, sat on these cold stone steps, 5-degree weather, and prayed through that verse. It changed my life. Here I am, Lord, send me. It was a turning point. Absolute turning point. All sorts of things transpired after that. And I never went back to that space until about 10 years ago. We were in Denver, Patty. We were hospital in Denver, and we decided to drive up one evening, or one afternoon. We came up. And I walked into that space. And there was a sense of kind of holy, wow, something happened here for me. And I share that because decisions matter. Decisions matter. I look at that event in my life as the SIM card in the little deal the other night. Now, in God's great economy of things, would all of you be sitting here today if that hadn't happened? I don't know. Maybe somebody else would be standing up here speaking. But all of that happened? I don't know. So last night after the meeting, I revisited that 47 years afterwards. I grabbed Stephen, and Patty was already asleep, so I grabbed Stephen and Jacob, the two guys that work with me, or Stephen will eventually. His team doesn't kill him first. So we walked down there and walked over to the chapel. And I got a chance to say the same thing again. The time I have left, here my Lord sent me. And in many respects, the fulfillment of that, in the broadest sense, falls to you. Because all of you sitting in this room have you represent actually the West. None of you here are actually, you are on and off itinerant into some other parts of the world. But what sits in this room, you have the opportunity to be more transformational on this culture in the West, in a broad sense, and particularly in North America, than anything that's going on tonight in Cleveland. I promise you. Or that's going to happen next week. We have the message, we have the people, we have the opportunity, we have increasingly the resources to genuinely re-win the culture. This whole emphasis that we're talking about, and which Gary teed up brilliantly the other night about movements, this is not the flavor of the month. This is not something that Sam kind of reinvented to give the kick for this decade. This has been aspirational for CRM from our very beginning. Movements of the good news. But in all honesty, these components have never come together like they have until the last 5 to 10 years. When these 5 things that are in that sheet that you got in your packet when you got here, when those 5 things have begun to fall into place. When I did the research on the book, which I'm assuming most of you got, if you didn't, see me and we'll get you a copy. All the staff should have gotten beyond the local church. There are no movements historically of the gospel. And when I use that term, movements of the gospel, I'm talking about a very precisely defined thing, and that's on that sheet. I've heard the term movements tossed around a lot this week, and it's a little bit like discipleship or missional and all these other things because of the popularity of the term, it loses its accuracy. CRM is not a movement. Getting a local church, engaged in the community is not a movement. A lot of things, we're tossing the word around a lot, folks, and let's be on the same page about what we mean by that. And we've been extremely precise in how that is defined on that sheet. We're talking about gospel movements. And the results of gospel movements are when people become followers of Jesus. Now, that entire concept of gospel movements, it is rooted, and I've got 2 minutes to say this, and we could spend an hour or two on it, but it is rooted and grounded in an understanding of the mission of God. The theological term is the missio Dei. The mission of God. And frankly, there's a lot of garbage and a lot of confusion and a lot of bad stuff out there right now that's being written and talked about the mission of God. And I don't think that's too strong to say it that way. And part of the problem with that is at the very heart of the mission of God is that people become followers of Jesus. Now, there's other aspects of the mission of God. I mean, creation care is part of the mission of God. And fighting poverty and the poor, heart for the poor, and social injustice, and on and on and on. But there is an ultimacy, there is a priority, and there is a primacy. Theologically, biblically, and historically, in the mission of God, that it centers on people being redeemed. Now, there's a crass way to say that, and that saving whales is not the same thing as saving people. And that has gotten very confused in a lot of circles. A lot of circles. The Lausanne Covenant, which is probably the best theological expression of Orthodox Christianity in the past 100 years, states it very, very clearly that in all of the activities of the body of Christ, all of the services and the things that a church does, and they say it this way, evangelism is the priority. Seeing people far from God, embracing and becoming wholehearted, committed followers of Jesus is paramount. And it's not wrong for us to always ask the question of everything that we do, of how does it contribute to those who are far from God becoming wholehearted followers and disciples of Jesus. So I know there tends to be, with the diversity in this room, when we start talking about movements, I'll be next week, and 2 weeks from now, I'll be in Thailand. Part of it, I'm meeting with all the leaders of the ethne teams, and there's a little insecurity out there right now of saying, wait a minute, what am I doing in the ministry that I have? How does this fit in movements? And folks, I challenge you, and I encourage you, and I exhort you, and again, Gary teed it up. Each of these teams, everything that you're doing, it is a legitimate question to always ask. How does this contribute to gospel movements to which God has called all of us? And as we're defining very clearly on that one page that we passed out. I think historically, somebody set it up here earlier, we've done a pretty good job on the last three things on that sheet. We're having to back up and learn a lot on the first two. We're having to learn a lot on the first two. But the mission of God. Another way of getting at that real quickly is, and Bill did this the other night, And that's, the mission of God is all about the inbreaking of the kingdom. It's all about the inbreaking of the kingdom. I mean, that second phrase in the Lord's Prayer is absolutely astounding if we took it seriously. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Now, two thoughts on that. One is, in the inbreaking of the kingdom, if people are not becoming followers of the king, the kingdom is not fully present. Okay? Just being present out there as people who love Jesus and expecting that to be the inbreaking of the kingdom, and we don't see people becoming followers of Jesus, no, the kingdom is not fully present. And evidence of the kingdom's presence is people far from God becoming followers of the king. And we cannot stop short of that result. And that multiplying result of individuals and groups. So if I'm working with a church, I'm working with a pastor, if we're not seeing that outcome, we are not fulfilling the mandate that God has given us ultimately. That's a biblical necessity. And in the inbreaking of the kingdom, it also means the signs of the kingdom break in. And that's been part of our journey the past 10 years, to understand the signs of the kingdom and the very presence of the Holy Spirit and what he wants to do in living power. Keith grabbed the one booklet over there. I've discovered in traveling around that you guys have not, most of you have not even seen this booklet. Please grab one on the way out if you haven't gotten them. There's a whole series of these we're doing, and you got two of them at Cancun. This one just was out earlier this year, Engaging the Supernatural, the CRM Foundation series. My suspicion is many of you haven't even seen it because I don't think we sent it out to staff. But if you haven't, please pick one up. There's more of these coming. Keith Ebley's writing one right now. Patty's going to be doing one on healing prayer. Darren Prince is doing one on making disciples among the poor. Mark Thrash is going to be doing one on generosity. Right? So there's a whole series. The point is, these just aren't my voice, but this one is. So when we get into this whole area of engaging the supernatural, I'm trying to lay out as clearly as I can on what that means for us. So please grab one of these. There's stacks of them over there. They don't want to take any of these home with them. Okay. All right, I'm done.